Welcome back to another template design video, and we're at Akashi Shore for this one, looking at the Prize Dogleg, which is something that's fast becoming one of my absolute favourites. Basically, this is, as you'd expect, it's a relatively tight dogleg that deals with careful angles, and basically the more you cut off the corner off the tee shot, the better your approach shot, and there's a load of different ways in which to make this really effective. We're going to look at this. It's a hole that can be easily a par 5 or a par 4. And we'll look at ways in which you can make dogleg holes really work. So leaping back to the tee, and the first thing you should notice is that it's quite a tight angled dogleg, because this one's really all about cutting the corner, so there needs to be quite a bit of a corner to cut. You can see that the flag's way over here, which means that there's a real incentive because you're going to shorten the shot considerably the more you take on. With that in mind, diagonal sort of bunkering on the inside is pretty much a must, or river or what have you. The other thing I quite like doing with this sort of a hole is having you think about run out on the other side. So if you're not taking on as much of the risk on this side and bailing out this side, you've got the potential of landing in a bunker, which is going to complicate matters on the other side. So it's really making the player answer that question of you see the dogleg, can you pick your spot on the horizon, aim and swing straight, or can you draw the ball around the dogleg to maximise or fade depending on where it is. So with this one, we want you to go as close to this corner as you possibly can, which is going to shorten your length into the green. And whilst it's a relatively short par 5 at just 531 yards, even if you're cutting the corner, you've still got 260 odd to this pin. So the dogleg makes it a lot longer than it actually is on the card. Whereas if you're bailing out over here, then it becomes a 3-shotter, and that's where these cross bunkers and things come into play. So what I think is important is that you think about this not just as a, well, when you hit shot A, where are you going to be? But if you're quite a way back, how are you then making that second shot interesting if the player can't go for it? Now, I don't think those cross bunkers are really going to be in play for many people, potentially if you've got the shortest driver, but they could be in play if you're laying up. You then also want to consider, well, if they're hugging that tight line, is the green rewarding that? For this one, you're actually seeing the green slope towards the water, so the more you're coming at it from the right hand side, the more the ball is moving towards the water. Whereas if you're going straight on, you can gently ride these slopes down. It's not a major thing, but it will be a little bit easier coming at it from the left hand side. So what we're really asking people to do on this one is see the corner and cut off as much as they possibly can. And if they're fading just a little bit out, it's not going to be the end of the world, but if they're way right, it could be problematic. So with this one, having done that, we've now brought in the second shot, and we can now go for the green. If we're a little bit too far right, that's going to be out of the question. So it's really all about the angles on the tee shot and then how you make that matter. Now this one's quite a friendly example as a closing par 5. We're going to look at some where it ramps up the challenge a little bit more and other ways in which you can make this interesting. So the second at Charleston Hall is another great example of a prize dogleg and how you can create difficulty just by the way you angle fairways and the shots that you ask players to hit. So the concept remains really simple. The more you cut the dogleg, the better your angle into the green, shorter approach shot, etc, etc, etc. Where this one gets really interesting is again that relationship between line and distance. The further right we go, the closer we're playing to these bunkers, but the more fairway on the other side that we have to play with. So you're having to think about rollout as well. So if I'm hitting driver down this side, I'm rolling out into heavy rough and then I'm facing a really tough approach shot. If I'm just squeaking over this corner of this bunker here, then we're probably ending up about down here and we're okay. So you've got to be thinking about everything is forcing you to just carry these bunkers and therefore take on the risk. So we could play 3-wood down here and there's a bit more generosity, or we could play 5-wood all the way down here. But again, you're going to have a longer approach shot in. So if we look at where we end up there, so playing even to this bit leaves us 200 odd yards in. Now it's not impossible if you're facing that shot because the green does all flow pretty hard back to front. So having a long iron approach shot into a green that's sloped hard back to front is easy to control because that will slow the ball down for you. So it makes distance control a little less paramount, but everything's encouraging you to try to take on this corner. So we'll give it a go, and then you've got the question of these trees coming in a little bit more. And I guess in real life what this hole would really be asking you to do that is less applicable in game is try to fade the ball. So by fading the ball, if you think about that curvature coming in, it's basically making the fairway longer because the ball's coming in more at this angle. Whereas imagine if you were drawing, well, you're cutting right the way across the fairway. So we'll give that a little bit of a go. Let's see if we can hit a fade. It's not my best swing ever, but you can see the principle working pretty nicely, and we've got a decent look into the green from that shot. Still a very tough approach shot, but you can see how the tee shots make you think, and it's a slightly different challenge. But I think the thing I'd really take away from this hole is thinking about how you angle your fairway, and particularly asking players to cut across a fairway, if you get your angles right, can be a really good challenge. So the next hole we're going to look at is the 16th on South Yarra, which is one of my favourite holes on the course, principally because I felt on this one I finally nailed the sandbelt angles and bunkering. So it's a very downhill, short par 5. It seems relatively straightforward. Now, what makes this complicated is where you've angled the fairway, how the land runs away from you, and the position of these bunkers right on the corner. So first of all, you can carry this bunker, but it needs a little bit of helping wind, or it needs you to fade the ball a little bit and loft up a touch. If you don't choose to do that, you're trying to take on just over this corner, but your longest driver might run out of fairway the other side. So that's the importance of, although this fairway is wide, you've got to be hitting a little bit of a partial shot, which is again bringing these bunkers a little bit more into play. You can bail out all the way down here, and that's no problem whatsoever. You can easily get to this green with 2 3-woods. It's just relatively few people will try it, and it does make that second shot a bit more difficult. So what I think this one did really nicely was, although it's very wide, it's still a tee shot that requires a lot of precision, and you've got to really pick your spot. Now, it's less of that kind of how far around you want to go, and more there's this one bunker, can you clear it, and if not, make sure you're hitting a partial so you don't run through the other side, and it's how much of a partial you're hitting that's going to make the difference. But it was a shot that I really enjoyed creating. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to hit a little bit of a partial down here, just over that bunker, and hopefully this won't run out too far. As you can see, you have to really hug the other side, and even then it's run out. So it's a very tough tee shot, even though it looks very open. You do still have some ways of getting around this though. The green filters from right to left, and it does run a little bit from front to back, which means that you've got chances to run the ball on if you want to, but you're then thinking about layup and where you want to leave the ball. If you're from the fairway, you're looking at just kind of running the ball about here and filtering it down, or as is the case with the Prize Dogleg, the more you can hug the right hand side of the fairway, the better angle you've got in at these pins. It's a tough fairway to hold the right hand side, and it's probably the toughest tee shot on the course, in spite of being so open, purely because it asks you a question of, can you hit a partial driver and visualize rollout, which is a tough question to answer and something that's not particularly easy to do. Back at Raynor Ridge, and we're on the 11th, which is the Prize Dogleg here. Now, if we load up the overhead, you'll see that we've got a very simple hole. Bunkers down the right hand side, which are urging you slightly over to the left hand side. And whilst it doesn't necessarily appear to be the case off the tee, there's a lot of slope, and if you miss the fairway left, you're running all the way down into this tree line, and that's not somewhere you're going to want to be. You've then got a green that is angled and has some quite interesting features. You'll see the swale at the front and the mound that are going to influence your pin positions as well. So with this version of the hole, it's still how much can you cut off the corner, because that's going to shorten your approach. The bunkers here are really to guide you to hedge more towards this side, and you are still looking at that fairway angle. If you look at the line we're coming on from the tee, every inch a little bit further left is going to yield a significantly shorter approach shot. You've got space to lay up as well and not take on the challenge, but if we're looking at the length of hole, that's leaving you kind of a good 190 odd yards in to maybe even 200. So it does want you to take on that corner, and in all honesty, with different pins you may want to be in slightly different locations. So I actually think with this one I'd be tempted to hug the bunkers on the right hand side and avoid running through, because I think I'd get a slightly better angle into that green, and I'm also going to be coming up more at that slope and potentially leaving it a little bit more easily with an uphill putt. But you have a bit of an element of choice with this one. So back at Fairyland for the 13th, which is another Prize Dogleg, and first thing that strikes me on this hole is, I mean, in addition to the very tight tree line that's going to make you really cut the corner, it's also the fairway angling. And the fact that you're hitting dead across the fairway means you have to be really careful with exactly where you land. The bunkering is very clever, so you can potentially, I'd imagine in this wind, we could aim right over the edge of the trees and possibly carry all the way to this which part of the fairway, which would leave a really easy approach into a tough green. But it's very risky and you may not make it. You've got these two bunkers on the inside, so we're having to think of exactly how much we can carry those by, but also because the fairway's running at a diagonal, we have to be worried about running out the other side. Additionally, as with others, the the green is angled to receive an approach more from this side rather than from over here. And for this pin in particular, the further right we are, you're taking on a little less of this big false front which dominates a large portion of the green. So it's a really tough tee shot. You can, because of the length of this hole, for a major course it's not that long as a hole, 457, and it's just posing one very simple question, which is how much risk do you want off the tee? Because into that green you've got to be coming at it from the fairway, and also the added twist on this hole is the usual of a hard back to front slope, which means you definitely don't want to be short, and you've got to be really careful with your putts. So we're going to try to have a go at this and see if we can carry it all the way over the corner of the trees. I suspect we'll come up a little bit short, but got to have a go, right? That's a really fun tee shot to take on. Now we may end up not quite carrying it all the way, and you can see immediately that, okay, we've got the angle, but coming at this green, you really need that extra bit of control, which means that the fairway was an absolute must. So that's the Prize Dogleg, and hopefully that's been something that you can take a lot away from. It's a real personal favourite template purely because of the subtlety of angles and the fact that you're asking people to pick a line rather than just giving them a bunker they can either clear or they can't. And I think that puts a lot of indecision in players' minds and forces them to make tricky choices. There's also that benefit of every little inch you go further right or further left, depending on which way the dogleg is, you get a benefit, and therefore it's really encouraging people to overreach. And that subtle risk reward is something that I find really compelling about a golf course. Hopefully that's been useful, and see you again soon.